and they're not always working together quickly enough to really make a difference. So there's really good people in the system that want to help, but the system is complicated, and they interact with, each system interacts different, you know, in ways that either get what you need or don't get what you need, and it's just a real challenge.
Well, thank you for sharing your challenge with us today. We certainly look to bring more resources for you and the boys. Their visit today at the Technology Development Center, I hope we can get them classes here and some assistive technology to help at home. And thank you very much
thank
for
you.
your
And I'm so glad you have the Pediatric Diagnostic Clinic, because we looked all the way into New Jersey to try and get the right doctor, and you were right here in Ventura County all along. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back to Get Moving. Dr. Chris Christian from California Lutheran University has been sitting in the audience, and I know he has some comments. We earlier heard a little bit about where he works, but tell me, what do you think about what you just heard?
Well, you know, the first thought I had as I'm listening to Ms. Nutley speak about her situation is just how incredibly courageous and brave she is. First of all, everything she's dealing with is, most families, fortunately, don't have to face it on such a sort of daily level. Your analogy to ER, she's on call, and it's looking the way she was describing it. The image I had is, so you're waiting for the next crisis, or at least prepared for the next crisis to happen. And we know that that does things for people's state of well-being. Renee seems very resilient, and so she's able to both do for her children and network and find the energy to keep going. And so she's strong in that way. But you can imagine how other mothers in that situation develop symptoms like depression, anxiety, their relationships deteriorate, right? There's studies that show that, in fact, the marital strain is such that you often find dissatisfaction in your relationship with a spouse. And so it's so complicated by so many things. The fact that she can find support in, I take it, in her family and in her friends, and some people draw support from their faith, but also from other families that are experiencing similar situations. And sometimes you'll find tremendous stories of resilience and strength among families that manage to support each other and say, look, this is how I cope. The other thing I was struck by is that there's no room for spontaneity. So you can see that the focus is on a situation that's ongoing, but it doesn't leave room for almost a personal life. And so it's hard, I think, and I would be interested in speaking with someone like Renee, but I would imagine it's hard to find room to stop being the caregiver and sort of receive some care, to make that switch. The other thing that we've noticed in some families is that there's an enormous amount of guilt when they do take time for themselves. To be able to say, I need to carve out some space where I can do the things that sort of bring me joy or satisfaction without feeling somehow I'm neglecting this ongoing project that's enormous. If they can do that, you find that the going out to the movies or talking to a friend, it refuels the person and allows them then to continue the work. But some families, you'll see, just feel a tremendous amount of guilt over finding enjoyment in life when there's someone they care for who's suffering or you know, in a prolonged state of pain. So it's very, very complicated, and yet I think that there are things that people are able to do that do help. The group, for example, support groups are very important. Another thing that I should mention about the support groups is that they combat isolation, because often in a schedule so busy, there's little room for connecting with other people, unless they're sort of built in as part of your network, but it takes effort to do that too. And so a support group actually allows you to have a sense of connection and maybe combat that isolation and not feel so removed at times. I'm impressed with Renee because she seems to, in fact, be energetic and really standing up to the challenge. And some people, it's very difficult for them to do that. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like Renee's going to be bringing as much to the groups as she'll be taking away.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can see how someone like her inspires other people who are struggling with the same issues. Someone you care for, how do you do this on a day-to-day basis? Even with such prolonged sort of this on-call syndrome, let's call it, that she, you can see post-traumatic stress where people find themselves just constantly not able to turn off thoughts, and especially with some medical procedures that are very painful. The other thing that I thought was interesting is you mentioned that she's raising these children, these adolescents, right? And how does she also do what a typical parent does, which is set some boundaries, right? And what I've heard, and we've heard in our groups, is that some people feel so guilty because they've put their child through so much just by virtue of trying to follow up on the treatment, that it's very difficult for them to set any boundaries, and yet then they feel they're failing the child in that way. And so it's a double bind for them sometimes. So I think in listening to other mothers and saying, this is what I have to deal with and this is how I found I can cope with it, I think it can be of enormous help.
I'd like to thank Dr. Chris Christian from California Lutheran University and Renee Nutley and the boys, Robert and Peter Nutley, for joining us today on Get Moving. For those of you who are thinking about nursing, obviously we need lots more of you, and you need to get to nursing school. You need to get moving. It's time to help out these families here in Ventura County. I'm going to need your services someday soon too. So thank you and good night.